All right, Coach, we're rolling. Like I said, I appreciate you hopping on here. I know it's kind of a little bit of a out of the dark kind of request on my end, but obviously we were able to connect a little bit and chat a little bit about the tactical world over the phone a couple times. And I was kind of putting my schedule together for the summer. I kind of realized I didn't. We interviewed a tactical guy last winter, a guy that I worked with at the Rockies, and he works out in Arizona, and he loves it. So he's kind of one of those guys that put that in my brain a little bit of kind of just reaching out to more people in the field, because it's obviously a growing field and a growing interest in that field from strength coaches. So it's definitely something that I appreciate your time talking to me on the phone, and looking forward to chatting with you and learning with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it.
So just kind of give everybody a little bit of background about you, where you're. I know we just chatted a little bit at the beginning here before we started, but just a little bit of background of where you're from and kind of what your path has been, and then eventually lead into kind of what your title is, and then obviously saying as much of what your of kind of what you do, and maybe we'll get into that as a kind of a follow-up question, but maybe just get into kind of like what your title and what your day-to-day role responsibilities are, but kind of just bring us up to speed on your coaching career thus far.
Yeah, absolutely. I got interested in this, like actually doing strength and conditioning, probably in high school. I had an injury from football, and initially I thought I was going to be a physical therapist, and then went to undergraduate and got a shot at some physical therapists, and I was like, that's not for me. It's kind of boring. I kind of like the performance side a little bit better, obviously coming from a football background. I also swam a little bit, so two wildly different sports. So definitely a good way to get perspective on some different like ways to train and stuff. So yeah, I went through undergrad thinking I was going to be a physical therapist initially, and then decided strength and conditioning performance is kind of the way I wanted to go. Started at a local gym in Columbus, Georgia, doing personal training, group class type stuff as far as like strength and conditioning, group class stuff. The gym was owned by two former sergeant majors within the Army, and I learned a lot from them as far as like the military and like that there are strength coaches there. That was back in 2012 that I learned that this field existed, and ever since then I was like, that's what I want to do. I thought football was cool, and then I heard about this, and I was like, well, I actually really want to do that. And during that time, I was lucky enough to meet my current coworker. At the time, he had just gotten to his position, and got to learn about the tactical side and kind of what it was all about. And at that time, tactical strength and conditioning was kind of in its infancy. They had just started up the programs in 2010. So everybody was still trying to figure it out as far as what they're doing in that space. Most of the jobs at that time required a graduate degree. So I knew I had to attend grad school at some point to get here. So for about 3 years, I worked at that private gym. Main focus was getting guys through Ranger School. That was kind of our big focus, and I learned a lot there. Went to grad school at Armstrong State, which is now part of Georgia Southern. So at the time I was there, we transitioned into Georgia Southern. So I guess I'm a Georgia Southern graduate, but the school was a D2 school. They didn't have a formal strength and conditioning program. So I was lucky enough to get to really start coaching and taking care of athletes there, as far as leading a weight room and getting a ton of experience from that, drinking through a fire hose. With those kids, ended up being the lead strength and conditioning coach for tennis, men's and women's tennis, and then assisted with all the other sports I could essentially just hop in on. After that, graduated, went to Savannah State as an assistant strength and conditioning coach for a little bit. There, I was in charge of pretty much all the sports that didn't make any money. So women's tennis, baseball, softball, volleyball at some point, and then I assisted with men's basketball and football. From there, I decided to make a quality life judgment. I ended up working for a local hospital in Savannah, doing their wellness center. There, I got to hop back into the tactical stuff a little bit. I worked with the fire department and the police department, whether it was doing entry screenings and getting follow-on clients for that, or doing annual screenings for the fire department and handling some trainee education and stuff like that, and then getting guys to return to duty from injury back into the fire department. I was also exposed to exercise testing there. I did a little bit of it while I was in undergrad, but as you know, you get like 2 weeks of it and then you're done. There I got to run VO2 testing on a regular basis, so getting really familiar with that, which has paid off in the long run for my current position. So yeah, from the hospital, ended up working for my first contract with the Air Force. I was on the big Air Force side within the TACP community, and then did that for about 2.5 years. Left that to move up with my fiance then, now my wife, up in Athens, Georgia. Worked for a D1 sports training for a little bit. Got pretty burnt out in coaching, especially doing that. Took a break. I became a warehouse manager for a coffee company for about 1.5 years. And then this job opened up. And luckily, the guy that was leaving was not the guy that I knew. And it's just a waiting game before I was able to get an interview. And now I'm here working in special operations as a tactical strength and conditioning coach.
No, I appreciate that. Definitely, it seems like a unique journey. Definitely more than just like the traditional, like you went to undergrad, did your GA with football program, and then you stayed with that football program until the head coach got fired, and then you had to go. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of one of those where it's definitely a little bit different journey. Where did you go to undergrad at?
I went to undergrad at Columbus State in Columbus, Georgia.
Okay, and then one of the things that you mentioned. So when you were working at that private gym, and you mentioned like this was kind of either right before or right at the onset of when, like, I guess these contracting positions started coming up for the like that were contracting with the military. The guys that you were working with at that private facility, there were some tactical guys that were coming in. I assume this was outside, like they didn't have contracting companies at the time working with them. It was kind of before all that started.
Yeah. So the guys that were coming into that gym were majority of what's here at Fort Benning is a captain's career course. So all the captains in the Army, they go to their respective fields courses to essentially become qualified as a captain. It's like a 6-month course. So we had a deal with the school getting those captains to come in. We gave them a sweet deal. And so I would get to train guys from the big Army or coming from special operations, getting their infantry officer like rating, things like that. And they'd come in, most of them are going off to special forces from where they were coming from. So I'm sorry, my lights just went out. Well, I guess you can still see me.
No, you're good.
Hold on. On a timer here.
It's all good.
But yeah, so those guys would come in. They're either training up for a selection or they've already been to selection, have been selected, and they need to train up for their training course essentially. So like with special forces, the Green Berets, it's going to be their Q course. We had a couple of guys coming through that were Marines, and we trained them up for their MARSOC, essentially Q course. Those are mostly dudes that I would touch. And then we'd have some big Army guys coming in as well that hadn't been to Ranger School yet or had just graduated the basic infantry officer course, needed to go to Ranger School as a requirement. So big focus on pre-Ranger, going to Ranger School, getting guys through that.
I gotcha. And we'll try to touch on a little bit of that here in a second too, because that's definitely something like I want to be sure I ask it in a certain way, but when we get to it. But the one thing that you also mentioned too is like the military or the police departments, the fire departments. I mean, I feel like that's probably the military is definitely getting more. And I know you see some strength coaches out there. I know like Matt Winning is really big up in like Columbus, Ohio, with working with the fire department and stuff up there. And honestly, I've learned a lot of stuff from him. He talked about tactical side, but I've learned a lot of stuff from him just from a training standpoint of just watching his videos and stuff. But I mean, it's just one of those things for me. It's kind of crazy how underserved I feel like, and I know this isn't really a question. This is just me more thinking out loud, but it's kind of just crazy how underserved like our local police department, our local fire departments really are, especially the ones that are like actually full time, like how undertrained they are. It's kind of it's almost like I look at it as like we should have a qualified strength coach in every high school, and we should almost have a qualified strength coach in every like local police department and local fire department and stuff like that, and not just reserving it for professional sports and for like the elite of the military. Like it's kind of one of those weird things where the people that need it the most are the ones that don't really have as many opportunities. It's kind of is that kind of what you kind of looking at the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes down to their department's priorities and budgets and things like that, and where they're spending their money and what they're prioritizing. So like, for example, Phoenix, Arizona's police department, and I think their fire department have strength coaches embedded with the department. And here that does not exist. So it is catching on, but I think out west it's more prevalent than it is on the East Coast.
Yeah. And I know when I lived in Tampa for a couple of years, I used to train a guy that was a Tampa city firefighter, and great guy. I mean, still kind of stay in touch, very, very like rarely stay in touch with him, but still kind of having my network. And that's one of the things that he told me. He looked at me one day and he goes, I said, why are you the only one in your department that like does this? Because it wasn't mandatory. They had a fitness test, but what they would do is basically like, if you couldn't pass the fitness test, they would just say that you had an injury, and then they would just drop your like the captain of his fire department literally, instead of having to run, they could ride a recumbent bike. And it's just like, that's silly, like that's crazy. And he looked at me one day, he goes, the scary thing is, he's like, my life depends on their fitness. And I'm like,
Yeah.
damn. I'm like, that is a crazy way to think about it. And he was like, so I don't want to have to rely on them. I want to make sure that I'm as fit as possible. And he kind of put that in my perspective. And ever since then, he's kind of one of the guys that really made me think about how important like being a tactical strength coach like would be, like how it's a little bit more important at times than, you know, whether your starting quarterback like throws 3 touchdowns or not. Like you know, that might be a life or death situation for some of these guys and girls. So it's definitely something to think about. And that's just, again, something that I think I'm very interested in, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the leading cause of first death upon first responders is a coronary problem. So they're having a heart attack or a stroke or something. So.
Yeah. And that's lifestyle, that's stress, that's the nutrition that they're probably lacking as well. They're probably living on the same foods that like college kids live in their dorm in, like, so it's just probably not great. So then can you give us at least as much as what you feel comfortable, what you're allowed to do? Can you give us kind of what your job title is and kind of what your role is? And I know you mentioned some terms, like selection and Q course. Maybe even just explain what they are, because I kind of have an idea, but I don't want to sound like I know everything. And I do, real quick, I know you mentioned the Air Force side, and obviously that's how we got connected was Nathan Lance kind of put us in contact. So shout out to Nate real quick. But yeah, kind of just give us an overview of kind of what your job title is, and kind of as much details you can give us of what your kind of day-to-day responsibilities are.
Yeah, so my technical job title is Special Operations Strength and Conditioning Coach. That's just what the contract company has us listed as. In reality, I'm just a tactical strength and conditioning coach that works within the special operations community. So I think that's really all I can pretty much say without having to go get a release. But so yeah, I work within a unit that's within special operations. We do mostly focus on standards here, and once those guys are reaching those standards, they can focus on other stuff.
So that's their standards for like whatever their next qualification or selection process. Like you're basically getting them up to that standard so they can pass, and that way the physical aspect of it is not like what's going to hold them back, essentially.
So yes and no. So to get into this unit, there's a certain standard, and then they have to maintain that standard throughout their time here. It doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are. It's the same standard across the board for everybody. Now, there are different fitness tests that they do have to complete that do have some age-based standards. However, you know, that's not weighed as heavily as the standard of the unit per se.
Right. Can you give us an idea of what, I don't know if this would like identify the groups or not, but can you give us an idea of kind of like what some of those standards are? Like I know like there's the basic training for the military has changed over the years where it used to all be like body weight and running, and now there is like the sled drags and the reverse med ball throws and things like that. I mean, can you kind of give us at least some of the standards that these guys are training for? Because I think that's one thing that is unique about that. Whereas like if I'm training football guys, like we might have standards in the weight room. We want to see guys try to hit a certain number, but it's like you could be the strongest guy on the football team and suck at football. Like it doesn't really matter. Versus like if there is a standard in terms of a physical fitness capability, like that does at least you kind of can check that box off of like, hey, we did what we needed to do to get this person. We helped them get prepared as much as possible. So can you give us some of those standards?
Yeah, absolutely. So like here where I work, there's a 12-mile ruck march standard. They've got to do that in 3 hours. There's a certain weight associated with that, which is 35 pounds dry with their water and weapon. There's their classic standards that they run. It's and this is probably going to give the unit away, but I'm not saying what they are. You can look it up. So it's a push-ups, sit-ups, 5-mile run, and chin-ups. It's 6 chin-ups. The 5-mile run's got to be done in 40 minutes or less. And then I don't remember off the top of my head what push-ups and sit-ups are. That's just the classic standard for the unit. Then they take another fitness test that has a standard. It's time-based. It's multiple events. It's done in kit. And I don't remember exactly what all the elements are. I know there's like a couple mile run in there with their kit on. They've got a Skedco drag, some walls, some ladder climbs, things like that. And they've got to do it within a certain amount of time.
I gotcha. What's I guess the normal like pass fail rate for guys once they like get to you guys? Like are most of them pretty close to already being able to pass that, or is it something where like there is guys that need to make big jumps and things like that? Like how much of that is like not, and again, it doesn't fall on you guys because we'll kind of talk about probably how that works in you guys because a lot of it's on them and they just have the opportunity to work with you guys. But like what is the normal like success rate with that, and how hard is it to get some of those guys to those standards?
So all the guys here pretty much know that they have to maintain their standard to stay here. If they don't, they get released for standards. So there's nothing that we really do or don't do. It's really upon them and their team leaders or squad leaders to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. We're here as guides, really. But for the most part, like we don't have guys failing standards here once they make it here. If they are, they're not here very long.
Right. And that I'm going to ask another question first, but that's kind of where I was going to go to next a little bit with like just the mentality and the level of maturity and professionalism and stuff that those guys probably have. I'm sure there's a lot of commonalities there, but I guess to go back a little bit on a question that I kind of glossed over earlier, like what is like on a day-to-day schedule, like what are you dealing with? Like, obviously I'm sure it's not as simple as like, hey, you got to pass this, 12-mile ruck. Like it's not as simple as just like, hey, go ruck. Like what is like kind of the day-to-day, like, and we don't necessarily have to get into like periodization and program designing, kind of that kind of mentality, but more or less like along the lines of like, I guess what did today look like? Like what does a normal day kind of look like in terms of like who's walking to, not specifically who's walking through the door, but how many people are walking through the door, what they're having you assist them with, and like things like that. Like exactly what does an average day kind of look like, I guess?
Yeah, so average day, I'm showing up to work anywhere between 6:30, 7 o'clock, and this is dependent on their cycle. So every day I'm here 6:30, 7 o'clock, regardless. Now the gym might be full. It might be 30, 40, 50 people. It might be 5, 10 dudes, and that's it. It just depends on their training cycle and what they have time for. And then like this week, for example, every day I've come in, I've had at least 3 VO2 max tests that I'm running. In fact, I've got 4 tomorrow and I've got 2 on Thursday. So I run a majority of the VO2 testing, and then that's done typically during their PT times, because that's when they really have time to do it. Sorry. We got some visitors that they might come in here. So
the, I guess, so I don't know how to best ask this. So I guess like a lot of their day, because of all the other training they're doing, all the the normal like military type training that they're doing, is a lot of this like purely like, now like they have to have PT time that's mandatory and all that to be able to pass these things. But like how much of it is like optional? Like you said, someday there's, depending on what cycle, then someday there's 5 guys, some days there's 30. Like, are they all following something that is prescribed by you and your coworkers, or is it something where like some guys can just come in and they can literally be like, you know what, I'm a power lifter, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna do my squat, bench, and dead, and I'm leaving. I'm not gonna work with you and work on my VO2 max? Or is it something where like there are certain standards, like, and I'm still not getting to the one question I was gonna ask, but like I was going to ask about like some of the sports science stuff too. Like, are you guys like, is there a system of getting them jumping on force plates, getting them all to do VO2 maxes at some point in time, getting them all to do a 1 rep max or something? Like, what is that? What kind of other standards, like maybe weight room standards, and just like bi-monthly, annually, like whatever, semi-annually kind of things is going down?
Yeah. So basically it's pretty voluntary here. They don't have to do anything that we publish. They can certainly come in here and do their own thing. And there's certainly not everybody is doing the same program at the same time. So we might have some guys train up for a selection to a higher tiered unit. We might have some guys, that are young and their whole focus is going to school to stay in the unit. And that's, dependent upon where they're kind of at. And then it's also down to the different like company levels, and the squad leaders or platoon leaders, they might want their dudes doing their stuff. And that's totally fine, because that brings them some, teamwork, camaraderie, and things like that. And it gives the squad leaders a chance to develop their younger dudes. We're there mostly floating around the gym, advising, making sure that they're doing things in a safe manner, and that nobody's going to get hurt. That's really, really what our role is. And then we have like kind of our set programs in our app that we deliver, just based on kind of basic goals, like obviously maintain standards, but we've got one that's like more for power. We've got one that's more of a single leg program. We've got one for rucking improvement. We've got some that are, dudes are coming back from injury, preschool, post-school type stuff, competition build-ups, things like that.
Yeah, I want to get to touch on the injury thing here in a minute as well, but I do want to circle back to the one question I was going to ask. And I know this is probably like a cliche question to an extent, but like, what's like from a personality standpoint, and maybe I could ask this as well, like what's kind of the normal age demographic that you're dealing with? And then from that, obviously these are guys that have at least probably been in for a couple of years already now. What is kind of the age demographic? And then what is like the mental demographic, I guess? Like, are all of these guys, I'm assuming probably not all of them, but are the vast majority of them kind of like your Tim Kennedys and your Jocko Willing type people in the world? Or are some of them completely like shy and backwards? And like, I guess kind of what's that culture like? What is that? Is it like working with people that are high performers, high achievers, but are they all kind of cut from the same cloth, or is that not the case?
I wouldn't say they're all cut from the same cloth, but they definitely all share one thing of like holding each other to a higher standard. So, we've got dudes that, haven't lifted a weight ever in their entire life. They're coming in. We've got dudes that are really into it. They played sports their whole life. You've got type A, type B personalities. But the one common theme across the board is they hold each other to a higher standard, regardless of where they come from or who they are. So that's kind of the attitude that we work with, and the culture. As far as like age ranges, I've got dudes anywhere from 18 to, gosh, these are oldest one, like 56. So wide range of, abilities, maturity levels, and things like that. I'm at one of the few units that takes kids off the street and puts them into the special operations.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was a thing. I thought they pretty much had to go through like basic and then go and get, a couple of years of like whatever experience and training experience before they could even apply for like a qualification course or something like that. I didn't realize you could pretty much go right off the street.
Yep. Yeah, you can definitely go right off the street. For the most part, we're the ones that are on the younger side, because we do need so many of a specific MOS.
Right. Yeah. I did see there. Which is, I guess is a good thing. I think it's a good thing, but hopefully we don't actually have to use them all. I saw there is like an uptick in enrollment in the military recently with the new president, but hopefully that's just means we have more bodies, that we don't actually need to use all those bodies for crazy stuff. But anyway, which again, I think it's one of those things where you're getting people that are willing to go and do those types of things. Like there's going to be, like you said, they're not all cut from the same cloth, but there is something maybe different about all of them that they choose to do that as their path in life. So in terms of like discipline, motivation, accountability, like the things that we worry about at like the college level, is that something that you guys, or even like the kind of buzzword of buy-in, like that's something that we obviously try to get? You mentioned like holding guys accountable. Like, I have to yell at freshmen, and I still sometimes have to yell at seniors, and your hope would be that the seniors are holding the freshmen more accountable than what the coaches and staff even does, which is kind of sounds like what is happening more in the tactical world, at least the aspect that you work in, or the realm that you work in. But is there still situations where guys are like that you guys have to deal with motivation, accountability, discipline issues, or is that something that's more handled by their, colleagues and their team leaders and things like that?
No, we are not enforcers or anything like that. We're not here to get on to anybody. We're here to help, which is quite nice. I'm not yelling. I'm not trying to corral 18-year-old, football players that are goofing off in the weight room. Nobody here goofs off in the weight room. If there's an attitude problem or something like that, it's usually handled by either their team leader, their squad leader, their platoon leaders, and then it's handled pretty quickly. So I will say the one unique thing about our unit, like regardless of anywhere else in the community, we are the only ones that like everybody has to pass the same standards. So like even our support individuals and things like that, they are held to the same standards. So you get a high level of maturity when that happens.
Yeah. So when you say support, what do you mean by that? Like the supports?
So our logistics people, our mechanics,
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
our cooks, they're all held to the same standards.
That's actually really cool. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and they all have to come through the same selection. I think we're the only unit in the community that does that.
Yeah, that's actually really cool, because it kind of makes that, it raises the level of the standards and the appreciation for everybody's role, because it's not like there's people that are getting away with not having to do the same stuff. So that's pretty cool. One thing that I feel like you might actually run, like an issue that you probably do run into a little bit more, is because you're going to get guys that have never trained, and you're going to get guys that probably come in and probably were D1 football players, D1 wrestlers, things like that. How often are you, and we'll focus on the weight room first, but how often are you like, you guys fighting, whether it's bad technique or just bad training habits, or you just see guys that are just trying to go heavy every single day, trying to how much of it is like you're fighting that versus like you're kind of just like checking in on them every once in a while, being like, hey man, you good? Because like it kind of looks like you're maxing out on squat every single day, and I don't know if that's the best method. Like how much of it is just kind of like a give and take versus like you're going to actually go and be like, hey man, you need to take weight off the bar? And again, I know these questions may sound like a little cheesy, but it's just I don't know your world, so like I'm trying to figure out.
No, absolutely.
How that works.
So here at this unit, everybody's like super open to coaching, which is great. And you don't walk into that at every place. There's other units within our organization that I've heard that's not the case. Like our guys here, we have a great culture of guys coming in, asking us questions if they don't know something, or if they need something. So it's not really a big problem here. Like if some guys like fucked up on a squat and I go tell them, and they're pretty receptive to it for the most part. And I don't think I've run into anybody here that's not receptive. At my last unit, that was a little bit of an issue. But that's only because my counterpart, the other strength coach there, just had built a bad relationship, a bad taste in their mouth. with that program and what it was supposed to be. So like if I was to come over there and say, hey man, your squat looks bad or your deadlift's terrible, here's how we fix it. Yeah, I would get scoffs. I'd be like, nah, I'm not listening to you. I don't want to talk to you at all because you're part of that, the human performance program. And that took a long time to build up trust with that unit. I'm sure you can ask Nate about that. So just complete stark differences. And as you know, like one person can make or break a culture.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I guess, what I was getting at. If like, it's one of those where it only really takes, one coach that kind of just is on guys all the time. Again, and a lot of times, like it's one of those where like these guys have maybe been training longer. Like you talked about, there's guys that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Like they've been training longer than what, like maybe some coaches are even alive. Like, I mean, if that guy's if there's a guy in his 40s and 50s, he may have been training longer than what I've been alive, like being in my mid 30s, you know what I'm saying? Or some of my assistant coaches are in their 20s, you know what I'm saying? So it's one of those where like, you definitely have to toe the line. And that's something that I learned when I was in pro baseball. Like, it's one thing to be like really coaching and being very like detailed and very technical with like an 18-year-old like kid from the Dominican, or even like a 21-year-old college grad. But like, it's a big difference when you're dealing with like a professional baseball player that's literally been in the big leagues for like longer than I've been like out of high school. You know what I mean? So it's definitely like, you do have to kind of like, you have to really create that relationship first before you don't just go over and be like, hey, your squat sucks. It's like, hey man, like how long you been squatting? Like, there's definitely a different way to handle that, as opposed to like going over and just yelling at an 18-year-old and be like, dude, take weight off the bar because that looks like shit. Like, you definitely wouldn't approach those two guys the same way. I mean, what is there kind of like, what's kind of like your words of wisdom in that regard?
So yeah, here, I mean, I haven't been here that long, and we've got about 800 dudes, so I don't know anybody's name. I know probably about 50 of their names. So, but it's usually, hey man, this is what I'm seeing. Here's how we can fix it. Are you feeling it this way or that way? Is something going off? Do you have an injury? There's questions that you have to ask. Even at my last unit, that's kind of how it was. Like, hey man, how's it going? I'm your coach, or I'm a coach here. You can utilize me. This is what I'm seeing. Here's how I would fix it. Unless like, it's purposely written into their program and it's something I haven't seen before. And they're like, no, this is how I should do it, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let me dig into that a little deeper and figure out what this guy's been told to do, instead of me just being like, nope, that's wrong. You need to change it. It's not right. For example, like, that's not really like a form thing. That's more of like from a programming standpoint, because there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat here. So like some coaches use rate of perceived exertion, some use RIR, some use percentage of absolute, some use percentage of whatever. So I want to understand that base of like, all right, this is what this means before I tell this dude like he's going to get hurt. Because if I see like 3x10 at 80%. I'm like, dude, that's way too much weight, especially if it's an absolute. But maybe he's 80% intensity, and like that's the way that's programmed.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it's definitely like, if you're going off percentages, that's a big difference versus somebody, especially that has a high training age, of them kind of going off feel of like, hey, your last rep of 10 reps should feel like an 8 out of 10, versus all 10 reps are 80% of your 1 rep max. Like you wouldn't even be able to do that. So right. I think that's actually a really good example of how to think about it. And honestly, that's something I bounce back and forth with too, because it's like, especially in the Division II college world, like we get these kids for like 4 months in the fall, we get them for 4 months in the spring, and then they're home for the summer. And it's like the 1 rep max that we did in the spring in April, is that really the same 1 rep max that we should be expecting you to train off of in week 8 of the football season? Like, it's probably not the same 1 rep max. Like that's a shot in the dark 1 rep max that you did 6 months ago. That's where I think like an RIR, RPE, or even if you have velocity based devices, doing something like that to where you kind of regulate that APRE aspect of things as well. Speaking of like velocity based devices, is that something that you guys have? You mentioned VO2 testing. What other kind of testing are you guys doing? What other kind of tools do you have? Is that something that, again, is kind of all voluntary? If guys like, do you guys have velocity-based devices if guys like doing that? What's, I guess, kind of what, not that I'm big into gimmicks and think that we have to have gimmicks and tools, but what kind of things like that are you guys, sports science, things like that, are you guys utilizing?
Yeah. So on the strength coach end, we don't really have anything as far as like force transducer, force plates, things like that for in the gym use. The VO2 testing is voluntary. But we got pretty good buy-in on that, because a lot of the squad leaders realize like, hey, this is a good thing. Like I need to have this tested, and I need my guys to come get tested. So I think in 2 weeks I've got a whole squad coming in. So me and the dietitian will tackle that, because she also runs them as well. And we tackle it from I tackle it from the performance standpoint and tell them how they should be running their zone programming and how they should be running. And she'll tackle it from the nutrition aspect of like, here's how we improve it on this side. And then we kind of come together on that, which is really cool. As far as force plates, Nord boards, things like that, that is mostly done over in the physical therapy clinic. We test them. We test every single one of them when they come in the unit, and we test them post schools, and anytime there's an injury, a significant injury that they need to be tested for, we'll test it.
I gotcha. No, I think that makes sense. Kind of going through like the medical side of it, I guess, kind of first and foremost, and kind of handle it on that side. What's the VO2 test, the VO2 max testing? What protocol do you guys use? Are you guys using like a Bruce protocol, or is it some other, like, what are you guys using?
No, so our guys are like super highly trained. So like a Bruce protocol just doesn't work.
Not enough. Yeah.
I mean, anybody that can handle walking well, like that test doesn't work very well. So we run an incremental running test. So we're at a 1% incline, and every minute, so they start off with a 3-minute or 3 mile an hour walk for 2 minutes, and then it bumps up to 5.5 miles an hour with a slight awkward jog. And then every minute we're going up 0.5 mile an hour. Some of our guys, we can't get to an RQ of 1 in that small incremental, because they are so fit. We have to take them to a manual test, and sometimes we'll hold them at stages for 2 minutes instead of a minute, and we'll bump up either the incline. If we're reaching like max velocity on running, we'll start bumping up the incline for them. So over there, we'll just take that manual test. For the most part, the incremental works really well for our population here. I've been fooling around with testing of their VO2 max under load as well, because we know that can change it. Haven't exactly figured out that protocol, but the bulk seems to be kind of where I'm leaning, because that keeps our miles per hour similar, but we just raise our incline. And with the external load on them, I don't want to hurt them by running. And then every time before they test, they come in and get a body fat on an in-body scale.
I gotcha. What's kind of the average VO2 for these guys, and what's the highest you've seen?
So special operations norms are between 45 and 60. That's our norm. The unit norm here is probably like 55 to 60.
Okay.
Our highest currently in the unit is 73.
Wow. Yeah, 73 is like what you see in a textbook of like, that's like cross country, like right. Skiers and shit. Like that's pretty.
I had 20. He's basically 21. He's 20.9 years old. A 21-year-old kid this morning, he tested at 62 or 68, maybe 68. Yeah.
Pretty damn good.
So he's got plenty of room to improve too.
What about body fat? What do you kind of see across the range there? Like what's kind of obviously it kind of probably is very age dependent to an extent, but what's kind of the averages and what's like the norms? And then the guy, like, have you seen guys down in like the 3, 4s, 5s, like wrestler, like kind of like in season wrestling type body fats, or what?
We don't really have anybody in the 3, 4s, and 5s. I think the lowest we average is about 7.
Yeah, like about the healthy where you want guys to be.
So for us, we'd rather them be up in the 12s to 15s, because that sustains them longer out in the field.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
And we want to fatten them up anytime they go. I say fatten them up. We want to increase that percentage points by like 1 to 2% before they go to a school that's going to be very physically demanding, or if they go to a selection. We want to try to get a little bit more body fat on them, because we know they're going to be sleep deprived. They're going to be moving a lot, and they're going to be underfed for the most part.
Yeah, I mean that actually really makes a lot of sense, because you can't go out there on 6% body fat and try to survive on minimal calories for an extended period of time.
It's extremely difficult.
Yeah. So I guess this is probably something I should have asked earlier, but it's got me thinking in terms of like, and again, be as vague as what you need to here, but like, what is kind of like their weekly schedule? I mean, how often are they kind of, again, expected to be doing things PT wise? How often are you seeing a lot of these guys in the weight room 2, 3, 4, 5 days a week? How many days a week are they running? How many days a week are they rocking? Like, just kind of as general as an answer as you can give, just so I can kind of wrap my head around exactly what it would look like for them.
So PT wise, they're expected to PT every day that they're here. Whether that's in the gym or not, I couldn't tell you. We do have our regulars that I see, at least 3 to 4 times a week in the gym, moving weights, doing cardio. We have an obstacle course outside our gym on our turf space that gets used every day. We call it the Punisher. It's awesome. But the squads go out there. You can get a whole 55 people up there, which is crazy, just doing something. So it's really highly dependent on what they're training for, what their squad leader wants them to do. I will say we see a lot of the older dudes in the morning, and the younger ones that we see in the morning are generally in there with their squad leaders or their team leaders. And I say younger ones. The younger ones I'm talking about are like 18 to 25, and the team leader, squad leader's time is like 24 to 30 something. So we usually see them in the morning if their schedule allows it, and then we'll have a lunchtime crew, and then there's a big influx of dudes that come in around 3:30, 4, because that's when they get released for work if they're on a normal cycle. And there'll be an influx of younger dudes that are, in the barracks coming here. And then I'm sure there's a nighttime crew because every morning I walk in, the music's turned up.
So are you guys kind of just logistically, is there, from a strength coach standpoint, is there somebody in the weight room pretty much all the time, or are you guys only there kind of during the day? So if they want to go in the evening, they're on there kind of on their own for that.
Yeah, we're here during PT hours. Like we're available during PT hours, which the unit's PT hours are like from 6 to 9. So those are like our business hours, and then like our office hours or anytime after that. I stick around a little later because I like to work 410s. That's a great thing about tactical is you can move your schedule around however you want to. Typically I'm working 410s, so I'm here a lot in the afternoons catching those younger dudes anyway. If they need something, I think like right before I hopped on this call, I had a guy come in and ask me about VO2 testing. So, it's beneficial to be here a little later sometimes. But they're not always here. So
I gotcha. I kind of usually ask this, like, especially like when I'm talking to like baseball strength coaches or basketball strength coaches or stuff like that about kind of like exercise library. And again, I know there's a very broad question, but I guess in general, what is kind of like some of the go-to exercise that either you program or just that your company or that your supervisors and your coworkers that you guys really like think is the most beneficial? Like I know, like again, going back to like I talked about Matt Winning at the beginning, like he's a big fan of just sumo deadlifts for tactical athletes just because of the position that puts him in and like picking something up off the ground, whatever. Is there like what kind of main weight room movements? I mean, are any of the guys doing like Olympic lifts? Is a lot of it more body weight stuff? Is it squat, bench, deadlift? Is it unilateral training? I know you mentioned injuries, which I want to get to here in a second. But what are kind of maybe like, I guess whether it's your personal or just what your department and kind of, the mentality in terms of like, what is the biggest bang for a buck exercise that we should be trying to have these guys do on a regular basis?
Man, shoot, there's no real favorite exercise here. We like to try to emphasize broader range of things. So like we want to get them in a power movement of some sort, whether that be a kettlebell swing to an Olympic derivative or a full Olympic lift. We want to make sure they're carrying something. So they've got carries in there. We want to make sure that they're hitting some sort of lower leg movement, whether that be some sort of squatting, deadlifting, something like that. Push pull in the upper body, and then we want to make sure their posterior chain is hit. And we just try to keep it as simple as possible because trying to teach 800 dudes how to Olympic lift, and they're all on different levels is nearly impossible. So the guys that are really into Olympic lifting and take it very seriously or really want to learn, it's great for them to spend time on that and learn how to catch and things like that. If the guy doesn't really care about it, I'd rather just go with a derivative or a jump or a kettlebell swing or something that's going to make them a little bit more comfortable and still get that same benefit.
Yeah, obviously that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of what I assumed the answer would be, but I think it's always good to ask, especially because, I know I got Nico on here. He was an intern with me a couple of years ago, and then Josh is a GA slash going to be a GA, going to intern with me right now. And we talk about in our internship development of just like the Dan John fundamental human movements, loaded carries, hinge, squat, push, pull, and if you do those 5 things on a regular basis, you're probably going to be in a good spot as a human being and as an athlete, but especially as a strength coach. If we're having our athletes do those pretty basic things, how much are you guys doing? Because obviously these guys probably have a lot of wear and tear just on their joints from just all the running and the rucking. How much are you guys doing additional? I know you mentioned posterior chain, but are you guys doing any extra additional trunk stability work? Or are you kind of just using the carries to take care of that?
Yeah, so they'll have a core exercise typically that we want them to do some sort.
Yeah, and then how much? Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just saying, how much are you doing? And again, I know this is probably just coming from a college strength coach mindset, how much are you guys doing plyos or any of the guys doing sprint work, maybe not even speed development, just sprinting, just so that if they do have to sprint at the drop of a hat, they are prepared for that? I mean, is that something that you guys are doing?
Yes. So, so we don't really do plyos here. The most plyo they'll get is some sort of box jump or something like that. Or some sort of jumps. They are, constantly jumping over walls and things like that in their daily, just existing in the military training. So we don't hammer a whole lot of it here as far as putting it in programs. So we'll go kind of minimal there, either a drop jump or, just some verticals that are weighted with a trap bar or box jumps. There's nothing really super sexy about that. We don't do sprint training, but they do sprint work. So we aren't training sprint technique for a 40. We're not doing any of that. We're not trying to make sure their form is perfect, but they do need to sprint because it is part of their job. So we're in a unique unit where endurance is equally as important as being fast in a shorter distance. So we've got to balance that a good bit. And then they also got to carry heavy things to whereas some of the units, it is a sprint regardless of where they're at. It is a straight sprint. And some obviously are more involved in the water than others. So you got to put a lot of swimming in, things like that. So luckily we are not a water-based unit, so we don't have to do a whole lot of swimming, but guys do benefit from swimming. So
yeah, I honestly, I think I always we'll go through a weird phase once a year where I'll go and just jump in our pool. We have a swim team and I'll jump in our pool and I'll do a couple laps and I'm like, damn, I should be swimming once a week. It's one of those where it make when you think you're fit and then you go swim and you're like, this is crazy. I did 5 laps or 5 lengths or 4 laps, 4 down and backs or something. And you're like, holy shit, this is crazy. I should not be this gassed from this, but it's one of those where it's probably, again, for most human beings, just functionality, it's probably an underutilized tool in my opinion. So getting into injuries, and again, I know I don't want you to say any trade secrets or anything here, but I guess from just an outsider's perspective, I would assume probably getting some lower back stuff just from all the rucking and the running. I would assume probably just common like acute injuries like sprained ankles, things like that. Maybe even some head and neck traumas and things like that from certain things like falls and trips and things like that. Even just out on the range, just the ballistic, the micro traumas of just the ballistics and things like that. What are, I guess, as much as you can tell us, what are some of those acute injuries that you guys are dealing with a lot? Do you get pulled hammies and pulled groins and things like that? And then what are some of the more big time chronic injuries that you're kind of seeing?
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely do get pulled muscles. We get rolled ankles that's a normal thing. A lot of guys will try to push through them versus getting them treated, although that culture is starting to shift away. I know the last unit I was at before I got there, the culture was we are not talking about our injuries. We're not even remotely saying we have one, because they would be put on a status to where they couldn't do their job. That was a big deal. And then there was a lot of work there with the physical therapist and myself, as far as like, hey, you got to, guys, report them. It'll help you out later on. If you tell us now, you can get back to duty sooner. Here at this unit, we do have a lot of those things. Guys report them for the most part. It is becoming more prevalent that they report it and get treated for it, because they know that, hey, they're not getting put on a profile to like not do anything. I'm going to do my rehab exercises or what I need to do, so I don't get injured again. So typical injury mitigation. So some guys, they're very good about going over to the athletic trainer, the physical therapy department, saying, hey, I have an injury. What do I need to do? Sometimes we'll catch them in the gym. They're like, oh, I got this nagging thing. And if we can handle that at the strength coach level, we'll definitely handle it. Whether it's just something that's bothering them that day, we'll find alternate exercises, work around it, suggest maybe, hey, you should start warming up this way, that way. You need to add mobility in. That's a big one. Trying to get some guys to do mobility. And then if it's more severe, we'll walk them over to the athletic trainer or the physical therapist that's on duty right then. So that's kind of how we handle injuries. And then the most injuries we see, overuse, of course, we'll see that a lot with all the running and things like that. You'll see we don't get a whole lot of stress fractures unless there's something else going on medically. And then we'll, shin splints and stuff taken care of pretty quickly here. And usually once the guys get a little bit of education on that, it resolves and then it's never a problem again. But our unit jumps out of airplanes a lot, so we get a lot of jump injuries, especially if it's a bad jump. So we'll get broken legs, broken ankles, head, shoulder, back. And typically they're dealt with at the physical therapy or even a higher up battalion surgeon level. And then they start coming back to us when they're ready to return. That looks like a return to duty program. That's, maybe they had a lower leg injury. We'll do lower leg injury rehab for 4 weeks under a certain program guided by the athletic trainer that's been developed between, us and the athletic trainer, as far as like bridging that gap, making sure they can still train and also get better at the same time, to return to duty faster. And then depending on what tier they land in that, that injury program is how fast they'll get back.
Yeah, I gotcha. You mentioned overuse. Is that mostly like kind of like tendonitis and like things like that? They're getting like knees and low backs and shit like that, where they're just the constant repetitive, just pounding into the ground.
So we'll get that IT bands, a lot of IT band stuff.
Yeah. The shin splints, what's kind of like the thing that you guys have found the most successful to either prevent it or to just treat it as quickly as possible? Because we'll have some football guys and some like basketball guys that'll get that, just honestly, in my opinion, for our athletes, just because they haven't played basketball enough over the summer, or football hasn't worn cleats enough over the summer. So, and your guys, I'm sure, just wearing the boots and all the crazy rucking and running that they're doing. What's kind of like the go-to things that you guys have found successful for that?
It depends on where the shin splint's coming from. If it's from rucking, it's probably because they've either put too many miles on or they've put too much weight on for the jump, and they haven't rucked since they went through selection, or they haven't rucked since 2 years ago when they took their standards test and they were like, oh crap, I got to do one. Then they hurt themselves because they also haven't been running either.
Right.
So see that guys will take a little bit of a hiatus from running or something and focus on a little bit of something else, and they're like, oh crap, I got standards, and they go out. So that does happen. If it's running, that we try to get them some sort of running education, because it's typically something to do with their gait, or they've just gone out too many miles too fast.
Right. So it's more of like a dosage issue than it is necessarily a dosage or a technique issue versus like some exercise or something that's going to fix it.
Yeah, it's really just an education on our end, and then the physical or the athletic trainer will give them some stuff to do, and then there's other therapies that they'll do, like needling, cupping, scraping, whatever, over there to help progress that injury into, a non-injury. And then it's really just education. Sometimes we will get into pose running and running technique, or it's their shoes. Like we might have a guy that's wearing shoes with minimal padding and they're a flat foot shoe and he's a heel striker. So he really needs some sort of padding and a heel strike type shoe.
I got you. That makes sense. So you've mentioned sports nutrition, PT. I'm sure there's probably like OT for certain situations as well. Kind of like basic living skills when they have like a serious injury, and then athletic training. Is there sports psych down there? Do you guys have sports psych that's working with these guys?
Yeah. So we have a cognitive performance. It's not necessarily a sports psych, and we share it with a sister unit here, and then like our other two units within the regiment, they have their own sports psychs at their units. So since we're co-located, we share one. We refer she comes down every now and then and works with them. But if there's something else, like if I got a guy coming in saying like, dude, I can't sleep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I'm like, all right, let's go refer you to our cognitive performance and really see what's going on. And then they'll typically also tie in the dietitian because there's probably something going on nutritionally as well. Or if it's like a dude that's got a mental block, just for some reason, like maybe they're in the shoot house or something and he just is having a block, we'll loop in the mental performance person.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably something very similar to like the injuries of guys being afraid to talk about their injuries. I'm sure. And obviously if you listen to any like podcast, like the Sean Ryan podcast or anything like that, like, those guys are kind of steel boxes sometimes. At least that's how the old school mentality was, of not saying that you're dealing with something, not saying that you're afraid of something, not saying that just can't sleep and that kind of stuff. So it's one of those where I'm sure like that's probably an underutilized but very necessary realm of these guys' lives, honestly. Like, and I don't want to try to make too many assumptions, but I feel like it would almost. I mean, I think even in the college world, I think our athletes are afraid, and I try to be like adamant about the idea of like there's like the mental health versus just like sports performance, like psychology is too. Like mental health is like you need to go talk to a counselor. You need to actually like talk to somebody that helps you get in a better spot. The mental performance is like, hey, like we just want you to have more confidence going into like a football game or whatever, or confidence making a free throw or whatever it is. I'm sure like there's probably a little bit of both of those that to an extent I would just assume is probably a little bit underutilized for your population.
Yeah, I would say our units are pretty good about utilizing the cognitive performance person that we have currently. I've heard the past cognitive performance person they didn't use very much. And I think it all comes down to their approach and how they approach things. At my last unit, we didn't have a cognitive performance person per se. We had a social worker. Mm-hmm. So she was more on the mental health side, but she would definitely jump in and try to help with the mental performance stuff as well. And again, she was way underutilized at first. Again, building that trust, me walking dudes over to her office and being like, hey, this is Denise. This is what she can do for you. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know we're kind of at an hour. I do want to ask a couple more, just more questions about just the coaching career. If you got a few more minutes, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I got all the time you need.
Sweet. So obviously you kind of talked us through like your coaching like journey and your experiences. I mean, what is something that maybe over the years because I guess you said you started coaching in 2010-ish, something like that?
2011-ish.
2011. So I guess in the last 14 years, like what's kind of some of the things that you feel like you maybe struggled with early on in your career that you've gotten better at, that maybe they became like, things that you can leverage now because of the experiences?
I would say definitely struggled like getting to know people, getting to know my athletes a little bit, because I am a more introverted individual. So I'm not one to be outgoing and say, hey, how's it going? Blah, blah, blah. So, just getting out of your comfort zone, out of your box, and like getting to know your athletes is going to pay dividends. And luckily I got to learn that at the private gym and like figure that out pretty quickly, that I needed to just get out of my shell and like learn about these people. And then as far as like getting into the tactical space and trying to build that, that buy-in with these guys, especially at my last unit, is like forcing myself to be in their space a little bit. Obviously in the gym, they see me, and then trying to find opportunities outside of the gym to go hang with them, see what they're doing. So at my last unit, I was able to go down to the flight rooms, hang out with them, shoot, the paper ball in the trash can, and make jokes with them at the end. Getting out in the field with them, seeing what they're doing, understanding what their job actually is. And sometimes they even let you participate. So like the other day, I got to shoot a machine gun. You don't get to do that in college sports.
Mm.
I've been able to call in an airstrike obviously under a ton of supervision, but those guys in the Air Force let me do it, and it was awesome.
That's freaking sweet.
So, getting out there pays huge, even if it's the most boring stuff and you've seen it before. Like I went out there and, with the Air Force dudes, they were going through their shooting stuff, some shooting drills and things. And I was like, hey, I'll come out both days. I went out there and melted. It was August, disgusting heat. And, I just went out there and sat out there with them and watched them, talked to them, made sure that they were hydrated. That was a big thing because we didn't have an athletic trainer, but I was like, hey, you guys drinking water? We have water, blah, blah, blah. That pays off greatly because a lot of those guys ended up coming to me when they wanted to go to a selection and things like that, because they were going from a conventional unit that is specialized into special operations. So helping guys do that. It also helped that I inserted myself into their best TAC-P competition. It's like, hey guys, let's coach up, let's train up, let's actually win this thing. And the unit I was at had probably never won it before. Me inserting myself, learning it the first year, and then coming back the next year and like winning our challenges, it got a lot of buy-in from guys. So, getting out there and learning about their field and what they want to do. So like, what helped me in the college realm, because I know you've got a lot of dudes that here in college or professional sports, is you obviously don't want to go hang out and drink with your athletes, which is definitely a benefit of the tactical field. You can go out and hang out with them outside of work because you are a coworker. But with my athletes, especially the ones from overseas, get to know them, where they're from. They're from Spain, understand some Spanish, figure it out. Figure out what they like to do outside of their sport, essentially, and that creates a lot of buy-in because it shows that you care. Just showing up to practice and to their games isn't really going to cut it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I think that's something that, first of all, I get excited whenever I walk out and the men's basketball team's out there before practice, and I just like casually walk by, hey, give me a ball, and I drain a three. Like that's like the highlight of my day sometimes. So I can't imagine what getting to shoot a machine gun would feel like in front of a bunch of your coworkers. That'd be pretty sweet. But no, you're right. It's kind of like developing just that, because we're not in their shoes. Like I'm not a college basketball player. Like, so it's one of those things where, being able to get kind of put yourself in their shoes, develop that empathy, because the more that we develop empathy with them, the more we can relate, the more that they're going to be able to kind of give us that buy-in from like a reciprocal standpoint of like, hey, like I know you guys played your ass off last night, like, hey, but we still got to get a lift in today. Here's how we're going to modify it so that it kind of meets you guys where you're at, and we're going to adjust things so that it's not going to blow you up 2 days in a row or whatever it may be. So, and again, that doesn't mean like we're being soft. It just means that we're being empathetic. We're like trying to put ourselves in their shoes and kind of get, because at the end of the day, it's like that one or two small training sessions that we might manipulate to where like in our mind, we don't want to change stuff, but like we decide we want to do it because we want to be empathetic. That's going to get us a lot more buy-in on the back end. So it's almost like you kind of got to like build that relationship up before you start like really being like, I don't know, I guess like more of a stern coach. Cause I've kind of used to do it the opposite way. I used to be like, hey, like I'm going to be an asshole from the, like at the jump, and then I'm going to get way nicer, versus like for some teams, you got to be a little nicer first and then get a little tougher on them as you go. Especially in the college world.
Absolutely. I mean, working with tennis, you have to be nice from the jump. There's no way. They're not going to listen to you if you're mean. or, women's basketball to men's basketball, two completely different things. Right. And here I can't be an asshole. If I'm an asshole, nobody's going to listen to me.
Right. Right.
So, and I think that was one thing as a younger coach that I was like, man, I used to nerd out about programming and like writing the perfect program. And like, dude, it doesn't matter. You could write something from Chat DPT and be the nicest dude and everybody likes you and they're going to do that program versus being an asshole and you've got the best program in the world. It's, thought out scientifically to the T. Doesn't matter. They're not going to do it.
Right. No, I'm literally, we just talked about that in our internship development meeting last week or the week before, of like, it's not necessarily even about the X's and O's of the programming. It's how well you can coach it and how well you can get your athletes to believe that it's the best thing they can be doing at that point in time. So, I mean, obviously we want to try to root it in science, but sometimes we're ahead of the science. That's the other thing too, is I think people forget as strength coaches sometimes we're doing stuff that like, there's not a page in the NSCA textbook that talks about what we're talking about. So it's definitely one of those things, or talks about what we're doing. So, I think that was kind of going to be one of my next questions, is just kind of like, words of advice for young coaches. Is there anything that specifically in your guys' world from the tactical side that when you guys get somebody, you guys hire somebody new, or even when you got hired for the first time, anything that is always kind of like catches people off guard, or there's kind of like, they need to make a quick adjustment about, like, what's kind of the biggest thing with that?
So I think what helped me coming into the tactical space, as a younger coach was like working in a private gym and understanding like, all right, I've got a 16-year-old over here and I've got a 50-year-old over here. They can't do the same things, and meeting people where they're at. That was a pivotal experience, is like trying to meet people where they're at and understand them and understand like their abilities and disabilities, on things. So, as a young coach, you need to understand that, not everybody's built the same, and you need to understand that, like, you got to meet them where they're at. And then as far as like a young coach coming in the tactical field, a lot of times it's required that you have some sort of collegiate experience before you get here. Usually minimum 3 years. It is a completely different world. Nobody's going to listen to you if you come in, try to take charge of the weight room and start yelling at people, and treat it like a football program. They've been yelled at in basic training. They got yelled at their selection course. They don't want to be yelled at. They get yelled at every day by probably their section leaders of some sort because they messed up. So they're adults. Treat them like grown adults, and you'll get a lot of respect out of that. So that's a big mistake a lot of coaches make. Fortunately, I don't think I made that. I guess I'll have to ask Nate. But this field is completely different. That it is, you're working with grown people that have the option to not listen to you at all, and or use you, period. So you've got to connect with them, versus in college, they're pretty much mandatorily made to come see you and listen to you regardless of what you do, who you are. So that's a big thing. And a lot of coaches that come from the collegiate setting into this setting struggle with not being able to like mandatorily make people do things. Like they were like, oh, you need to do this program. This is this is why I'm here. It's not why you're here. You're here to advise and, assist them and help them make smart decisions. So.
Right. Now, again, I talked about that, and that's something that I think that I definitely think I would have probably overlooked and came in with a potentially wrong mentality if I were to get into this field, especially back when I first started getting into like the college world and the strength conditioning world. And something that you pointed out that I guess I never really thought of, but I think it actually makes a lot of sense, is that the tactical world, specifically kind of in the realm that you're in, is probably a little bit more like a private sector facility than it is like you said, a D1 weight room, which is really cool. Cause again, I liked working in the private sector. So to me, that makes a lot of sense, but there are a lot of coaches out there that have never worked in the private sector and never had to, they've worked with Georgia football players, which, no offense to those Georgia strength coaches. Like I know they're all great guys and everything. Like I don't know them, but I know that they are probably really great guys and they're very knowledgeable and do a great job. But I think sometimes those are the easiest athletes in the world to coach because they're literally like the best athletes on the planet already. You really don't have to do much to make them any better. In fact, you might be doing more harm than good, actually. But I think working in the private sector, working with like 13-year-old kids that have never, that, you know, can't walk and chew gum at the same time, and working with a 60-year-old granddad is probably going to make you a better coach anyways, regardless of what field you go to work in. Um, were you going to say something there? Because I kind of have a follow-up question, because what I was going to say is, like, what do you think the reasoning is then that, like, that college football or college experience is so important on a resume? Like, why, if it's different, if you have a different mentality, and again, I know you don't necessarily, you're not in charge of these, you know, contracting companies and everything, but I mean, is there an argument to be made that, like, having college football experience, like being at Georgia for 5 years, wouldn't necessarily even be as beneficial as working at a private gym for 5 years?
So I think if you had experience at both, it's beneficial. Guys that come just from one or the other, I think they lack perspective on either side.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, not every time, because some of these private facilities handle a wide range of people, you know, professional athletes to down to that 13-year-old or even that 60-year-old, you know, grandpappy that's hurt.
Right.
So there are facilities that exist like that, but they're few and far between. I honestly, it boggles my mind why that's the requirement. That has been the requirement since 2010, and I think that, and it's not necessarily the contract company that makes that requirement. It's the bigger military as a whole that makes that requirement. Somebody up there says, like, this is the experience. These dudes know what they're talking about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, like, to their credit, yes, a lot of them do know what they're talking about and do know what they're doing. It's just the culture change. A lot of them can't get on board with. So, like, I think having experience with athletic performance and working around a schedule, working around a season is very important knowledge, because I do need to work around these dudes' schedule and their training cycles and things like that. But I also need to know how to work around an injury, how to work around somebody that hasn't ever lifted before, or, you know, is getting older and, like, can't do what they used to do in the weight room and need to, like, have significant modifications. So I think I benefited, you know, working in that, you know, private sector, and then going into that college realm, and then working in a private sector again as well. Um, I think that made me a very well-rounded coach. And I think, you know, if a guy's goal is eventually getting to tactical, they should probably find some sort of side job when they're in the down season at a private facility, if it's just for a couple hours a week.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And like I said, you know, I worked at the one private facility in Florida, and I was saying we had that guy that was a firefighter, and he was kind of the first tactical guy that I worked with. And, you know, I was also working with high school kids, college kids. I mean, the place that I worked at was known for its NFL combine prep. So it's like you're working with NFL combine guys, and then 5 minutes later, the guy that I was actually my jujitsu instructor would walk through the door, and I'd be training him. And then the firefighter would walk through the door like 5 minutes after. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where you just get a very much more well-rounded experience, and you're not gonna have. I think the thing you mentioned that probably to me like stands out from the college aspect is just like the logistical aspect of like your day-to-day, like having good structure throughout your day. Like that's something that I've really learned, like just the professionalism of working in the college realm. Like that's something that's really probably been the most beneficial versus like in the private sector, you never really know who's going to show up, which again, also is probably a little bit more similar to what your job is. But I think that's one of the biggest things for me about the college world is like, it does teach you how to like be a really good pro, because you have to like have a lot of things structured. Everything's got to be logistically laid out. You got to be everything's got to have a good flow to it. And you can't like you have to be efficient. Versus in the private sector, you might have 10 athletes that you're expected to come in, and one of them comes in because there's a snowstorm or something. And it's like, all right, well, my whole day is kind of like out the window now. So I guess one last question, just because if any of the guys and girls that are going to listen to this, you know, would eventually want to go into the tactical world, or just any job, I guess, for that matter, what are some things maybe that, and I don't know if you're ever involved with any like the hiring processes or anything like that, but what are some things that, you know, obviously we talked about kind of the resume, but even just personality traits, things that stand out that maybe young coaches to help them get a job, or just to be able to like have it, like sustain a job and be good coworkers and be good colleagues and be good coaches for the people that they're going to work with, especially in the tactical world, but just in general as well.
Yeah, just I think this goes for any job, really. You know, as a younger coach or any coach coming into a situation, unless you're being hired to be the head guy, you're the dumbest dude in the room. I don't care who you are. you need to be okay with that. And I think, people that have been to grad school kind of understand that, like, oh crap, I don't know anything. And understand when you're interviewing for a job, you do know stuff, but you don't know everything. And you are probably the dumbest person there. And I mean, I felt like that when I first started at, the Air Force, and I was willing to learn. That's another thing, is you just need to be willing to learn and take direction and take advice or feedback from people, and like going to seek out sources and things. So like the Air Force guys, when they were training up for their selection, it was a completely new selection than what they had been going to, because the unit had changed over to a different one, and they ran a different type of selection. So the first guys that went, they did okay. I prepared them decently from what I could understand was the selection. And then I really dug down into like, all right, who are the strength coaches up at that unit that they might be willing to talk to me about the selection, or like how to prep these guys a little bit better. And going in and taking that advice. And they actually published a program online. Looked at the feedback that the guys gave me that they could, because they all signed non-disclosures, and then took whatever the strength coach was willing to tell me from up there, put it together, made our own program, and it became super successful, getting guys through to those units. For example, so the first two that went, they came back pretty beat up, which is normal for a selection. Like, you're going to be beat up. And then we took that to the next guy that went. He ended up getting picked up. He came back. He wasn't like the top physically there, but he came back without any injuries. He wasn't super beat up. He felt pretty good. And then I took that, made it a little bit step further, always improving that program, always improving our process, and worked with physical therapists, mental performance people, see if we could change anything. And then the next group that went, they both also got picked up or got invited back. And they all finished top 5 physically out of that class, which is phenomenal. And then so we just kind of kept that rolling. So those guys are doing great. And that's, whether that's in the tactical setting or, at Fairmont State, I'm going to reach out to, West Virginia University and say, hey, what are your guys doing that I can incorporate to my guys? Just be ever learning to like you're doing with me, just reaching out, trying to learn as much as you can. And that's really the best advice I could give somebody as a young coach, is that you're dumb and you don't know everything. And probably even as the head guy, you're still dumb, but you got to know a little bit more.
Yeah. No, I think it's again, it goes back to that kind of like that Dunning-Kruger effect of like when you first graduate, like you think you know everything, and then like you actually start coaching and somebody puts you like on the spot and you're like, oh, actually I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, you kind of have that overconfidence because you just know like a tad bit. And it's like the further I get into my career, it's like the more that I learn, like it's more I realize like I really don't know half of what I thought I knew. And I was actually talking to a guy from a sports like science company like 2 weeks ago. And I talked to him about like potentially buying some of their products. And he started just kind of like, in a good way, kind of like talking my ear off. And he was saying terms that I'd never even heard of before. And it's like, I've been doing this for like 11 years. And I'm like, I've never heard of the things that you're saying. Like it was like very, like we were talking about like jump mats and like force plates and stuff. And, I know like the eccentric utilization ratio, but he was telling me a term completely different than that, but it kind of told you the same thing. And I was like, man, I've never heard of this. He's like, yeah, you need to go look up this guy. Never heard of that guy. Hey, you need to go look at this guy. Never heard of that guy. So it's like, so literally today I actually listened to 2 podcasts about from 2 of the people that he was talking to me about. So it's like, it's one of those where like, had I not reached out to him about this product, like there's a whole little niche of sports science terms that I never even would have heard of, at least this far in my career. So it's kind of, it's one of those where like that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited, because it is really hard sometimes at my level, being the head guy to D2, without having done this podcast. This podcast has been such a blessing for me. It's been so awesome. And obviously great for my network and everything as well, and all the guys and girls that have worked for me and will work for me. but it's one of those where like it's kind of really opened my eyes to be like, man, like there's a lot of different more ways to think about stuff than just kind of what like the people that I've worked alongside have thought about. And the one thing you mentioned too about, basically kind of what you were saying about, realize that you're the dumbest person in the room and realize you need to learn. Like one of my favorite little, I don't know what you would say, quotes or little quips or whatever, is the idea of like confident humility. I think I read that from I forget what leadership book it was. I can't remember. It's something I just read this past winter. One of the books I read, but it basically talks about the idea of having confident humility. Like as a strength coach, yeah, like we want to be confident, but at the end of it, we also want to know like, hey, like there's so much more shit that I don't know. So I think that's awesome to be able to point that out. And again,
I think my favorite phrase is like, I don't know, let me look into it, or let me find out.
Yeah,
I don't know something, which happens probably like once a week. So.
Yeah. Actually, now that you say it, there was a guy that reached out to me today, a guy that he actually played football for us at Fairmont. And then he ended up, he wanted to go special forces. I forget exactly what happened. He may end up actually listening to this. I forget exactly what all happened with it, but he's been working, he's been like a federal police officer for the last couple of years. And he's doing some other stuff now, training and stuff for, I can't say what it is either, cause he told me today and I can't tell people, but he's training for some other stuff now. And he was literally sent me a message this morning out of the blue being like, hey man, my roommate's looking at doing this program. What do you think about it? And I had never heard of it. So I kind of had to go through and look at it. And there were some parts of it that I'd heard of, but it's one of those words like it's kind of crazy sometimes, like as much as like social media and everything's kind of like shoved in our faces, like there is still some shit out there that like we don't know about. So it just kind of it humbles you. It made me really like, again, take a step back and be like, man, there's still so much shit that I don't learn. Talking to that guy 2 weeks ago, talking to Colin this morning, like it just made me really like realize like, man, like there's still so much to learn out of there. So,
oh yeah. I mean, there's so like when I do VO2 testing, the guys are like, hey, here's the run program I've been doing. One of you guys did not make this up. They're pretty straightforward with us. They're like, it's this coach out of here. And I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that dude. And then I just look at the program and they're like, yeah, I'm not getting any better here or here. And I'm like, well, this is how I would structure this a little bit better. So They can still have confidence in the program that they're doing. I'm not crapping on their stuff. And it's really not a bad program. It's just maybe not optimal for their training style or what their goal is. And it's just like, okay, we need to switch a couple of things. You can still continue to do this, but let's switch this here and here.
Right. So. Yeah, no, it's going. Actually, we got, because I'm very much like a speed, strength, power guy. Like I'm not big into the aerobic. I don't like doing it. So it's one of those things where like I've just never spent enough time like training people to do it. I'm not our most distant sport at Fairmont is cross country. Like, so I've never worked with like triathletes or anything like crazy like that. But we have two of our former athletes that just graduated. It's a boyfriend girlfriend couple, and they're training for their first high rocks this year. So like I've been writing their program this summer, and honestly, it's been really fun because it's like it's not quite as like, I don't know what the word is, not quite as like variable as CrossFit. Like I'm still putting them in through like 4-week training blocks. But it's fun to like just mix stuff up. Like, and honestly, just make stuff up. Like some of it's not even like scientific. It's like, hey, I just want you to go do wall balls and handstand walks and run and like do all this because I know that you need to just work. Like you just need to get your conditioning base up. So it's just like a fun thing like that to do. It's not just like working with football players and doing the same shit over and over again.
Yeah, we definitely do some of that here too. Like it's definitely not all scientifically based. Majority of it is, but like if I'm going to make out a workout that's on the turf and they just need to suck, like that's not scientifically based.
Yeah.
It's suck, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they want. They want to have that, like suck fest every now and then. But for the majority of our training, we're going to do it scientifically based, in the smart way too. But definitely being in the tactical space, you have to be well-rounded because I'm sure no strength coach really likes doing endurance. I don't like doing it.
Yeah.
So, coming here, not having done it for a while and like actually programming it and understanding it, I had to learn real quick again, like, hey, since I'm going to be the VO2 testing guy, since I do have experience in this, I need to understand what zone 2 looks like, what zone 3s, 4s, 5s, and why we're training in those zones and the time limits that they need to be set at and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning. I'm always going to be learning about that. I'm sure there's going to be a better way to do zone 2 in like 3 or 4 days that I'm going to figure out and be like, oh, I need to tell my guys to do this instead.
Right.
So.
And that's, again, that's just like a perfect example. Like I understand the zones, but for me to actually like sit down and like explain exactly what's going on in each zone. Like that's just something that's not in my wheelhouse because it's something I've never really had to do. So that's something that like maybe in the future we'll have a follow-up call. We'll talk a little bit more like just the aerobic side of things, just because again, I think that's something that most strength coaches most of us don't like that shit. So we don't really get involved with that stuff. And it's one of those things where I think that's a weakness. Cause I think every athlete, no matter what sport you play, even though I think that football is a very anaerobic sport, there is an aspect of having a better aerobic base is going to make you a better athlete. It's going to make you recover in between plays. It's going to make you recover in between practices, recover in between training sessions, and between reps and sets and all that. So there's definitely a component to it that I think we could all benefit from.
Yeah, definitely saw that with like when we did women's soccer at Armstrong. It was like, hey, we are an anaerobic sport because they are a repeated sprint sport, but they need that aerobic base to have that endurance to last throughout that whole game. But the ways that you train a soccer athlete to get that anaerobic base or aerobic base is way different than the way I have to train my guys. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's great. It's crazy. So I guess, to give, I don't know if these guys have their mics or anything ready or if they have any questions, but just if they have any quick questions, Nico, Josh, you guys got anything for Coach Mahnken real quick?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. I wanted to ask, you may have already answered it, but how often do you guys test your standards?
Strength coaches here don't test the standards. We facilitate their tests as far as like making sure they have the equipment that they need. But the guys in the Army, in the unit are the ones that administer the test and say, hey, you need to test your standards. We need them for this or that. So I never really get to set a time of like, hey, this is our time to test standards here. At the Air Force, I had a little bit more control of it because in the AFI, and the AFI is just a mandate. Like it's the rules essentially. It's a rule. It's like your uniform must be this way. So for the AFI for human performance on their fitness test, I was the one that had to administer it. I was the one that had to grade it. So I was the one to set time and standards. And in the AFI, it said at least every, I think, 15 months is what they were requiring. We would try to get it done every year, just to keep them current as far as testing goes. But yeah, here at this unit, I don't have any control over that. And we really just test our injury metrics, essentially, as I guess what I would call them is our force plates, our Nord board, our mobility and stuff is when they get injured or come back from a school or when they first get to the unit.
Actually, I think that's a good question because I don't know if that wasn't asked, and then I would have actually thought it would have been more often, but I guess it's not. It's something that's just it's more or less there just to keep them so that they know they have to have standards at certain throughout their career, not just like it's not trying to like one up their standard like every 6 months or something like that. It's just kind of just to keep it there.
Yeah, they have. Like I said, they have to maintain their standards. There's no golden prize for exceeding some of these. So like the standard. A lot of guys are higher performers and they want to exceed the standard. That's great, but they don't have to. As long as they meet that standard consistently, they're good. The combat fitness test. There is a point-based system. So exceeding that standard, that base standard is preferred. But as far as our guys exceeding like a ruck standard, it's awesome, but it's also if they meet the standard, they got it. They're good to go.
Right. That makes sense. Josh, you got any last minute questions?
Yeah. So when you get guys in through their 18X, so those really young guys that are just coming off the street, I know you allow some guys to run their own program. Do you kind of set them on a path, and then once they hit a certain threshold, they kind of have the choice to start doing what they want to do, or how does that work with you?
So here at this unit, when they coming from if they're not tabbed, if they haven't been to school yet, their whole focus is going to school and getting ready for school. we have programs on our app that we use to deliver programs that are geared towards going to school. However, a lot of those guys are told to do whatever they're supposed to be doing by their team leader or their squad leader. And it's highly dependent upon those two individuals, like their squad leader and their team leader, of what those guys are actually going to be able to do and are doing. So we don't have a whole lot of control over that other than advising them like, hey, this is the program I would recommend you start doing. So I don't have any control over them, what program they really do.
So I guess to an extent, there could be some of those guys that you still never even see then technically, because it's not, because nothing's
I'll see them the first time they come into the unit for their introduction, get them signed up for the app, and I probably won't see them again until they graduate school.
Yeah, I got you. What do you guys use, like Team Builder or Trainer Rogue? Is that when you say app, that's what you mean, like a training?
Yeah, we use Bridge Athletic. Yeah. So that's and then like for some programs we deliver them via Excel because guys don't like the app. So we're gonna, if we can touch points with them with Excel, go use Excel. So
that's interesting.
But as far as the control over what they're doing, it depends wholly upon their squad leader or team leaders, and then if they pass school or not. And when they go to school could be in a year, 6 months, could be 4 years. Just depends.
I got you. That makes sense then too. Well, Coach, I really appreciate it. I know we definitely ran over. I try to usually keep them around an hour, but there was so much information here. I mean, I was able to ask the majority of the questions I wanted to, so I really appreciate your time and appreciate your sharing your knowledge and experience with us. I probably haven't done a good enough job in the past episodes of doing this. Is there, and I don't want people to reach out to you. No one's going to reach out to you with crazy, stupid shit. But like, is there any way that, like, do you have any problem with anybody trying to connect with you if they ever wanted to for just like more questions or anything like that?
No, absolutely. You can hand them out my email. I try to respond to those within, 48 hours, depending if I have access to my email or not. But yeah, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has, or if they want to talk more about specifically, where I work outside of a public forum, I'm happy to do that. I can definitely talk specifics. But yeah.
Well, sorry, I'm muting myself. I appreciate it, Coach, and it was good chatting with you, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, have a good one. Thanks, guys.